And I just want to thank everyone for coming here, and thank you for the center for having me here. And I brought this because I wanted to thank the interns for providing me with this award. Cleaned it up. I think the Forest sponsored it. Fixed my name, you spelled it wrong. It has a monetary value of $3 million. I'm expecting the check. So thanks for this. Cleaned up real nice, so you know, just put it right there. So thanks for the introduction. So that's kind of my quick background. And so I'm in Georgia, and I moved to Georgia in 2019, and so it's right before the pandemic hit. So down there, I'm a professor. This is my dog Bento. He also learns from me. He enjoys 3D modeling and printing students' work at home for me along the way. So, kind of to start a quick little backstory here is I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and so that was really formative in the way my practice is today. It took some time to get there, but there's a lot of things growing up that influence it. And so if you're not familiar with Pittsburgh, right, it was one of the cities that was part of the Rust Belt, but it's still part of it. It's kind of moved forward a little bit. You know, a handful of those cities have kind of taken next steps into new technologies, Pittsburgh being one of those, right? But growing up, it really hadn't done that yet. Really the only thing kind of keeping the city kind of clinging to life was healthcare. Like that was the big industry. But growing up, I always heard stories about industry and how it was like this really cool thing and this great thing, but I never saw it. I just saw the decay from it. So it was really interesting to me to hear stories of something that was so great, but just to see the residue and decay of it. The size was great. It was fantastic to see these massive machines and these smokestacks were just all around. So that's become a big part, and you'll see that kind of trickle into my work. The second part of the city is, if you're not familiar with it, it's super like thrown into nature. It's in this valley. There's 3 rivers. You can see in the first picture here, and there's just hills, and it weirdly feels like European in a way, which I never knew because I thought everything was like this until I left Pittsburgh and went to the Midwest, and it was just flat. But I thought it was kind of funny. Like if you look at these stairs, like these were just built. Like the architecture in the city is super weird. There's land bridges across things. So I used to play football under this bridge. Like we played football under bridges. It was just normal. There was land under bridges. You walked up giant flights of stairs just to get up to the next level. This is the south side slopes. You drove back and forth to get up. I think one of the steepest hills in the world, or roads, is in Pittsburgh. And so because of that, there was this weird kind of separation of communities and neighborhoods. So growing up, it was like, you had all these like Polish Hill and Little Italy and all these different areas, and they all had their own churches and they all had their own communities, and it's like you would step into these different areas. And so it felt disconnected, but it felt really connected in a way. So everything had its own unique individual traits, but then at the same time, when you traveled around the city, everyone was super into sports, a very sports city, so it felt really communal. So both those things kind of have pushed certain aspects of my work and kind of are where I'm at today. So fast forward, like Carol was saying, I went to Penn State for my undergrad. I made a bunch of stuff, made a bunch of bad work, I made a bunch of good work. Well, I made a bunch of bad work, took a bunch of bad photos. So this is just like a bunch of stuff, right? So this is like the quick kind of explosion. And it wasn't really until, and I started in art education and math. Those were my 2 degrees actually before I went to sculpture. And it wasn't until my junior year that I felt like I got any grasp on anything, and almost kind of later on because I joined the program pretty late. Going in with art ed, they were really focused on theory, so I didn't take a lot of art courses, and then I was minoring in math, because I had to get a job, right? So if I couldn't be an art teacher, I'd be a math teacher. So it was about my junior year, I started getting introduced to some digital fabrication tools, and so this, just kind of like an early piece, is a dinosaur model I blew up, made it disproportionate, kind of played around with it, and I laser cut all the components of it. And what I found really interesting about this is for the first time I felt like I was creating my own material. parts. And that was really interesting to me. Growing up, I enjoyed Legos and things like that, like a lot of kids, but there was something really engaging about creating these components that were my own, like they were mine. And so from that, I started to explore this idea of like repurposing the components, right? Because they're mine now. Before, I kind of borrowed them, right? I had blown up a model and I had taken theirs, kind of worked it a little bit, but now I wanted to see what I could do with them. So I started taking some of their techniques of slotting and then cutting my own slots into them and rebuilding them into more of these kind of abstract shapes. You can kind of see bone parts, and so this was really kind of informative to how I would start to build my practice later on. But in a turn of events, I actually kind of just dropped all of this and really jumped into this kind of performative work or very theatrical work. And so this is where I guess in my life I started to pursue. Like growing up, there was the constant of work. So I was in a blue collar family. I started working when I was 12. I think by the time I was 15, I had my first 40-hour week full-time summer job. I was working. Like, if you weren't working, you weren't moving forward. That's kind of like my life. It was work comes from work, and you just work. When you didn't know what to do, you worked. And there's pros and cons to that, right? So like, I worked a lot. By the time I got to grad school, I think I had 20 jobs. A lot of them 3 at a time, multiple times, different places, different cities, because that was somehow ingrained in me as progress, this idea of work. So about this time, I had stopped playing sports and I felt this weird need to physically make and be part of the work. You can see the kind of components and this kind of bad picture left. So I started to play around with this idea of like becoming part of the work. And so I made this series, and this was a lot of work I made. I had all these dreams about flying. They were really important to me early in life, this idea, this sense of freedom, so I started making them into sculptures. Ones I couldn't move, I got trapped in this one for a little while. And my friend had to save me, took it outside, climbed a tree with these metal wings. But I was really playing around with the idea of where I was in the work, like what my physical body was. My body was a component, in a sense. And I really love this piece. It was this weird sanctioned off area, and I made this thing, and I just kind of went in. It's kind of this alien-like feel. And I was also struggling with kind of identity at this time too. So each one of these like gave me some sense of freedom, or I was someone else, and it was like I took on a persona for each one of these, right? And this idea. I threw this giant paper airplane off the parking deck afterwards to see if it would fly. So there was a lot of humor in the work too, which is interesting because like there was humor being this weird kind of performative, but to me it was really genuine, and there was something really important to me about being someone else or being in a different situation. I was also really interested in mythology at the time, so I started picking up on stories. So referencing Atlas, right, carrying the world. I felt like my brain was my burden. I was kind of all over the place, so I made a giant brain, carried it around, took this picture, kind of referencing the idea of holding up the sky as well, which is what the story is about. I also had to be Hercules in that sense too, where the brain was kind of like I was free from it, so taking on the different personas. I was really interested in, the story of Icarus, so I had made these cast wax wings. They were 3D printed feathers that I then made a mold of and cast them in wax, and went up on top of a parking deck, right, to try to get these pictures. And part of it, these pictures too were also, I really wanted to make sure they felt displaced, like you didn't know where I was, and they felt like these surreal-like settings. And again, for me, it was about the struggling with my identity, who I was, and I just wanted to be someone else for a while. And so this is kind of where undergrad wraps up. And towards the end of undergrad, I was still, so color was really important in my work, and then at this time I wasn't out yet, and I was still struggling with that part of my identity, and in a weird way, I think I resisted color, but I really wanted to use it. There was something about like creeping into my practice, like it's almost like I involuntarily was trying to say something, but at the same time, I always was like, this is the rainbow, but I made it reversed because somehow that would tell people that it was really weird to me, this resistance. And so I started doing this installation work. I had my first solo show in Pittsburgh at the time. I was also the gallery manager of this place, so I could kind of do whatever I wanted. So I painted the walls 16 times, and I painted them in, and again, I couldn't start with red, I couldn't work through the rainbow because there was this weird thing, so I had to start with like the color yellow. But what I did is I worked through the colors and I painted the walls over and over and over and over again. So that it was entirely white space. And then for the exhibition, my show cards were sanding blocks. And I asked people to kind of work through that color. And the show was called Subdivisions, and I was thinking about this idea of, again, being in Pittsburgh and about these kind of dispersed areas and kind of having to conform to that. There's a Rush song called Subdivisions that's part of the inspiration from it too. And there's this idea of conformity in it. And so I just wanted people to just peel back this very stale, pristine room and start to unveil colors. And at one point you could go too far, right? Like, and you could get to the raw wall, but I had put 14 layers through it, so a lot of, and it surprisingly hard, but my mom did a really good job, and so when she was doing it, I'm like, if she can do it, like anyone can do it. So because it was really fun. It was like this, it was just an experience, right? The room was packed, people were just making graffiti, and it was just really fun, and this was my first like out of school solo exhibition. I had some paintings in the other room that were done in the same way. But it was just something really exciting about seeing the space transform and just people being free. And it, again, I think it had to do with this idea of work was physically exhausting. Everyone's like panting. One of my friends, I did paint the ceiling too, in certain spots, and put a ladder in there just so people would go up. So someone did go up and like was like sanding away at the ceiling. And so there was like this weird like sweat and exhaustion in the space too. So that was really, really good experience for me. And again, at this time, I was struggling with a lot, and so I actually left Pittsburgh, moved to New York, slept on a couch, worked in a studio, and just kind of lived. This is where I had a lot of jobs, multiple ones at a time, and really just took in as much art as I could in the city, right? Like, every day it was like, can I make it to Chelsea? Can I go see these free shows? Can I go there? I would always get yelled at for having bags and coffee and galleries and things like that and walking around. But like the just tapping into these openings, these big artist openings, it was just really exciting, and I just took that time to just like take in as much art as I could. But it was New York, and I had no money, and I had no computer, and I lived in a place that I thought I was gonna die. So it was like, you know, there was like the heating was always breaking, and there was like CO2 in the air. I'd keep my window open at night, so it was. But anyways, and so with that, I knew I wanted to do more. So that's when I went home, kind of recalibrated some things, and applied to graduate school. And so I got to grad school. I made a bunch of stuff, a bunch of bad stuff again, took a bunch of bad pictures, blah blah blah, and jumped forward. So I'm really glad I went to a 3-year institute. So if anyone's thinking about graduate school, I think I burned my first year on doing nothing, right? Just kind of like settling back in. And again, still struggling kind of with what I wanted to do. And interestingly enough, color became completely devoid of my work. It was just raw materials. And this piece, it's kind of this version of an abstract cloud. This was kind of when I left the work. In a personal sense too. I was supposed to be driving this around like a car. And then I pulled myself back, and this is made up of a bunch of small kind of erector set style pieces I designed. And the only thing holding it together is the thread. And the metal in it is actually supported by the thread as well too. So the only thing holding it up is all the thread. I just spent time just tying it, twisting it, building it. And it's pretty large, it's about 6 feet wide, 4 feet wide, you know, and you can kind of walk up into the middle of it if you wanted to. So it's pretty large, and I suspended it from the ceiling. And so this time, because I pulled myself out of the work, I was a little confused as to what I wanted to do. There was this loss of kind of this physical sense, like I didn't really know what I wanted in my work. This was also the first time I got to experience stone. I did a residency in Italy where we got to have get to cheat. I had 7-axis robot arm rough cut this. You can kind of see some of the line work, the tool work in there. So they did about 24 hours of carving for this before I got there. And then when I got there, I worked through and did the finishing work. Both smoothing it out, kind of shaping the base. At this time, I was kind of figuring out too, like where I wanted to be in the line of like art history. I was also interested in this weird sense of like art history almost starting to disappear. Like how many, like at what point does, like do people not know what the David is anymore? Who these things, because like with media now becoming so overwhelming that like how long can we hold on to these things? And funny enough, when I was there, they had done this study that the ankles were really weak on it. And they do this crazy stuff underneath the statue to try to keep it from, you know, if an earthquake hit. And my statue that I created was very weak ankles as well too, based on the size of the base I put on it. So I thought that was kind of funny. And I really wanted to kind of get that lean off of the pedestal as well. So again, kind of figuring out what was next and still struggling with this kind of aspect of my identity, I decided to kind of reinvest in color in a sense where I wanted to expand it. And so for my M.A. exhibition, I made 109 individual components and I named them all. They're dumb names, some of them. That one's Blaster, that one's Fred, that one's Jeff Repko, that was a nickname I had when I was a kid because I used to have an afro, or doing curly hair. I think that one's April, right? I could probably name maybe 25% of them still. I wanted to really embrace this individuality, but then I also gave them kind of interlocking components. So for my M.A. exhibition, they were able to interact with each other and connect to each other, build these clusters in the space. I welded these metal armatures to support them and kind of give them places to exist, but they could be moved around, they could be reconnected, pulled apart, and it was really the first big step into kind of the component-based work that I work on now, and you can kind of start to see these early ideas forming both in color, both in the expansion of the color, not just working with the spectrum anymore, but really trying to broaden what colors I was working with, and really starting to figure out what my components would be, what my personal work would be, like what I wanted to create. And I think at this point too, the work became really fulfilling to me in a way, and it was for me at this point. And I started to cross this border of not feeling like I had to make work for anyone else and I was making it for me, and I enjoyed that a lot. And so moving forward from there is when I started moving into kind of like this current body of work, I guess. I enjoyed what Jim said the other day, these seasons of work. And so this season of work, I guess. But I always think there's like weird things if you look back, and I was talking to Dwayne about this earlier, is when you start to look back at your work, maybe you leave things out, and then later on they become really important. And so there was a piece I made in undergrad on the right that was completely made out of paper, and I like this real physicality of making these components out of paper that I could move and bend. And when I lived in New York, I used to draw these really weird drawings that I had these ones with the subway and these and bridges and like all this really weird stuff because there was so much going on in the city. And my favorite thing to do in New York was read books at the Starbucks in Times Square. So I didn't have any money or anything, so I would go to the library there and I'd get books, or I'd go to Barnes & Noble and read them in the Barnes & Noble cafe so I'd have to buy them. So I'd always be hanging out in Times Square, and I love this visual noise. Like I always played music, I wasn't listening to people, but just seeing them. And there was like this power of this wave of people. And I liked being in it. I like pushing against it, just being in this group of people. There was something really cool about collectives and what they can do. And so, and like I remember one really vivid moment is just being in Times Square after work, got off, or went down, and this woman who had come in, it was snowing, and she was just looking at a billboard with her mouth open, just staring. And it's like in the vibrant colors, and this was probably like 10 o'clock at night, like I got off work, and you know, Times Square just was like that 24 hours a day, right? The bright lights, and so I was just really interested in this moment and this kind of point where all these people could come together. And so I was doing these weird drawings, and then I made that piece. And so, so I started to bring this technical aspect back into my work. Started to really think more about growing up. Almost felt like industry left me behind. Like I had all these promises growing up, like industry was great, it was super cool, it was gonna do great things for us. But I never got that. And so it became abstract in a way because it was so distant to me. Like I didn't understand it. Like what were these machines? What were these super cool machines? Like I used to look at I think it was the 60s World Fair, these really cool robots, these really odd things, like these cool colors and stuff, and like none of this future happened. And I grew up with these people kind of like clinging to it in a way that was really depressed. Like it was still hopeful, but they knew it wasn't going to be there. And I think we saw that a lot in the past. I think we still see it now. This idea that there's something that people are still clinging to that's never going to be there. And so I started to think about like, okay, well, you know, what these things have been. And it's in a funny way, like I really embrace digital tools and technology, but I think they're really deceptive. And so with my work, I really started to focus on the hardware. And so the hardware is always different colors. I try to make it stand out. And I feel like, at least to me, there's this truth to it. Like it's not lying to you. If you look at this thing, you can think about how it works. You can start to see where gears would move. Your mind can start to try to make sense of it. It's not just this. It's not just something that does a bunch of stuff. Like you think about what it does. You might not know, but you could leave being like, well, I wonder if I could move this. And so I really like that. So I started working with kind of these larger scale pieces. These are CNC'd out. And then I was working with smaller scale at the same time. These are laser cut. And the laser cut pieces kind of became my sketches in a way. They're still full pieces, but I treat them as sketches and practicing and kind of planning things out. And so they both have very similar processes. These are the laser cut pieces are actually, to me, it's like more of a pure tinkering experience because I try to always use all my materials. So when I cut them, I get all these little extra pieces. So I plan a bunch of pieces and I get a lot of pieces I don't plan. And essentially a lot of times I'm just drawing and just making as many as I can. And then when I go to build with them, there's no plans. You just build. It's just this pure enjoyment of just gluing pieces together. And I sit there under a light, a little knife, and I listen to music, and I do it for hours. And I just build these small, interesting, weird things. Color is really important, right? So I do plan my color palettes. You know, throwing in a couple of different shades of pink and throwing in some different greens, right? I plan that out. Usually the color palettes are just from specific memories. Maybe it was a toy, maybe it was an experience, maybe it was just like a Pepsi. I think a Pepsi sign inspired my work. There's just really weird things. I really like doing stuff that people don't see either. So the insides are planned. Like you can see this red one. That's the inside of it, and it's super planned out. No one's gonna see it, but again, it's like I said, I started doing this work for me, and it felt important, and so I continue to do that. So there's a lot of internal components and pieces that you don't see. Sometimes structural related, I do plan that out, but a lot of times there's just kind of weird stuff going on. Kind of the next step of that too, again, and I wanted to figure out how to make the CNC maximize it as well too. So what you'll see here is I'll plan a few of these components. Then in the digital program, I'll see the offcuts and I'll plan to keep them as well. So I'll model them into it. So like this first piece, I planned half of it, got half, and then 3D modeled the whole thing. So I planned it out. So I took the components and figured out where they would go. So these ones are fully designed versus, like I said, the laser cut ones. Laser cut ones, like freedom, right? There's a lot, but these ones are fully designed because they have these inserts and they need to have certain things because they're bigger, they're 6 feet tall or 7 feet tall. So there's a lot more planning involved with it. And this one has acrylic on it too, so sort of incorporating that into my work. Again, still trying to embrace this idea of like building them and taking them in different parts and showing them different ways. So this piece is broken down into 3 pieces as well too. I designed pedestals that they would slot into as well, so the pedestals become part of that interactive components. You can see on the left, it's got a little notch. It actually notches into the back. There's a slot into it. Any of the ones that are multiple pieces, they always slot together, and I just use dowels to hold them. So they're never, if they are built-in components, just kind of like this one, they stay in components, and I slot them together, and I try to keep them. Makes shipping a lot easier. It makes moving them a lot easier, and it's fun to send something to someone and tell them how to put it together. I don't see my work as ever ending in the process. This process is now started to become like circular, so I'll make a piece, if I hang on to it for a while, I'll cut it up and re-envision it just to see what it looks like, alter it, change it. It's part of my process of just understanding what's next, also understanding balance. I want to push those different things. These 3 set of pieces were made at the same time, but there was, they've been kind of envisioned differently. So these were part of my M.F.A. exhibition. My work generally doesn't have titles. Sometimes, it does, they're just kind of random. These ones didn't, they were a little more important. This was called Crescendo. It was supposed to be this kind of like upright motion in music. I was listening to that a lot. This was Portamento because it was like a junction point in music, and this was the only piece that actually connected, had a junction in the middle. And then this one was called Fermata because it was the only one that was lifted, and it's a pause in music, so it was lifted off the ground and supported by the pedestal. And they were inspired by the Miami Vice Sunset poster. Like, that was the color palette for that. At the same time, I got a commission to do some work for a toy, like this toy musical, and that got me into painting. I made these giant 8-foot paintings to hang behind it. The guys who projected on it did a really cool job. They could change the colors to my paintings and stuff. Like in the left picture, they look like projections, but they were actually 4x8 CNC paintings. What painting has done for me, it's given me an outlet to make money. It's like an honest thing, right? Paintings can sell. It also allows me to photograph my work. I look at these as photographs in a way, right? So these are all photographs of digital models, right? So I've taken the digital models, I move them around, I take a picture in the program, I turn them into vector lines, and I CNC the line work, and then I reverse paint them. So they're painted directly onto the acrylic. The borders are often pretty beefy. I want it to feel like an object. I don't want there to be a lot of separation between my sculptures and my paintings. They both are made from the same materials, and so they both, like, material list, M.F.A. paint, acrylic. And so they're the same, and so there's this weird, are these paintings, are these sculptures, and kind of back and forth. Especially because my sculptures are really flat as well, too. Because I do it digitally, I have this like giant library I'm creating, and that's one of the things, like, I had a professor ask me on my way out, I was like, why do you create these things physically? They're digital. And I thought it was a good question, right? Like, I'm modeling these things. Part of it for me is the painting is really important. There's an intimacy there that I don't get to experience anywhere else. I mix my own paints. I don't buy pre-existing paints. I buy like 6 starter ones. I buy really deep base house paints, and then I mix all of my colors off of that. So like all of these paintings are usually off the same colors. I get a lot of oops paints too. And so there's something that's really important to me, this moment, and then the laser cut pieces, like, they wouldn't exist, they don't exist digitally. But because I do it, I get this ability to move around. Like, I'm in a virtual space, I'm in a physical space, I move back and forth. So you can see the laser cut piece on the left, and I didn't have any plans for it, I just built it. But if you look at the top of it, I really liked the top, so I built it into this sculpture. And when I designed it, all the extra components from the top became the rest of the sculpture. And then I really liked it, so I took a picture of it and I made it into a painting. And so sometimes when I make paintings, and then the painting didn't make the color palette, so then I pull the color palettes out of the paintings and I put them back into the sculptures. So there's just really, like all of my works become extremely process-driven. But it's really fun to me and I enjoy it. Right after this, I started moving into public work. I'm like, how can I keep my process going and can I keep expanding the medium? Because it's digital, I was able to build pretty much the same exact way. So in 2018, I started doing public works. This was my first one. This one's traveled a lot. It's in Illinois right now. It's on the roof of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Madison, in that picture. So it survived, it's pretty good. It's 4 years now outside, it's doing well. This one was a really fun one, so I got someone to kind of have a leap of faith, and they gave me a little bit of money to, well, I couldn't afford it, so they both gave me money, which allowed me to do it. But we built this one with the idea of proposing a grant. And this is kind of where like my work's really exciting for me, is that I took this sculpture, I designed it, I had the digital model. When we got approved for the grant, I got the next step of funding, I actually built components off of it. And so if you look in the middle of it, on the left side, that's the same piece. And so because I had the model, I was able to accurately design everything to fit on top of it. And so it's essentially just grew. And then this one's a permanent installation in a park in Madison. It's like a 10-year installation. And built the cement pad to go along with it too. But I wouldn't have been able to build it so easily had I not had the model, because I had all the dimensions, I had everything in. I actually went back and redesigned the whole metal armature underneath it as well. So it slots into place. Just like the rest of my work, it assembles very similar to the wood acrylic pieces, where they're layered in. I usually design kind of tight metal armatures. They're not really pretty, just good enough. Stainless steel, that's it. Bad welds, doesn't matter. Sometimes grinding down in the way. But it's built the same way, and the work then was able to move outside. And so I'm able to be part of public exhibitions. And again, I have this thing, I've taken pictures of this, I've made paintings of these works. And it just keeps kind of going around. I think this green one, my original proposed image was the middle one. And so you can kind of see it. I just couldn't build it. It was like really weird. It had this like point at the bottom. And so when I actually got the grant, I redesigned it. But you can see the kind of top and the central portion of it is the same as that green kind of turned around. Then the pandemic hit right when I moved to Georgia. So I lost all my studio, moved to Georgia. I dumped a bunch of work, right? I just packed up a car and drove. I thought I'd start this great job as a professor, moved into your space. I had a biology classroom, that's my sculpture space. I had no work, and then I was like really excited still, and then the pandemic hit and I went online and I had nothing. So I started making these small sculptures, these laser cut ones. And putting more detail into kind of these individual pieces. Again, it's really similar to, if you remember my M.A. exhibition where I had these individual components. A lot more detailed. I like them on these weird tiny pedestals I made because they look big in the photographs. I was really interested about what was going on in the world, and social distancing was really, like this was like right when the pandemic was hitting, and I had an exhibition coming up. And so I was making these pieces, thinking about individual people and thinking about how we couldn't interact, right? And so each component is made twice. So there's two identical components. Every piece is cut twice so that I can make two at the same time, like I build them exactly at the same time. I think maybe one has been messed up, but no one's gonna know except for me. But they're all identical, and the second one gets put into this cluster. So the piece kind of exists in two life forms. This one is a collective, and one is a disperse. The dispersed part. And so I was kind of like interested in this idea of like, potentially being together, but then also kind of being separated. I also like this idea that people could buy the individual ones and have a piece of this other sculpture. It made it more attainable for a lot of people I know, right? I guess growing up, like art was seen as, I never experienced art growing up. Like I didn't go to museums, I didn't do anything like that in my family. I was one of five. We didn't really do much. I think by the time I was 6, 4 of my siblings had full-time jobs, and I was living in this house of just chaos. I shared a bedroom with 3 other boys. I was 8, my brother was 18. He was working full-time as a mechanic on the week and coming home at midnight. I had school the next day. It was a very active life. And so I always
kind of told myself I always wanted to make my art available for people, and so this piece was kind of an effort to do that, where I could part with these small ones and then kind of keep this larger one. So that was kind of part of the driving force behind it too. And then in the installation, I made them all 6 feet apart, so that people couldn't come and view it. So each was built on these tiny, tall wooden pedestals, and they were spaced out 6 feet, so people came into the space. I think this was July, so it was 3 months after the pandemic started, so there was a lot of places that weren't having exhibitions. So I was luckily able to have it and keeping people apart. We did time slots, and if you were looking at a work and they were looking at one, you knew you were 6 feet apart. So I had a lot of fun with this. I like this little tiny key piece. But it kind of just, what this was about was that kind of intimate moment of going up and looking at these. And by making the pedestals small, they felt like you were looking at these big sculptures, at least to me. Like there was no difference between those and the other ones. When things started to kind of get a little bit better, I tried to pick up and do a little bit more public work, and that's what I've been trying to do recently. And I'm really inspired by these small pieces, and I'm still making them. I make them in sets of like 30 to 40, so I'm in the process of building like another set of 30. But I thought it'd be interesting to then, okay, can I put them into my practice the same way everything else is? And so I started to try to blow it up. So again, I stole some parts and designs for this one, and this was a commission for the Gatesville Housing Authority. They bought this from me, and so I was like, okay, I want to try to pull that in. And then I did it again with this piece, and I just finished this one last year, and I just took it to Chicago a couple months ago. But this one was a lot more like, okay, and so I found that now I can take these small pieces and use them as proposals for sculptures, and then make it out of the material. Obviously, I need to change some of the structural elements, so I build in more things to support it. Do slight changes to the material, right? So that's plastic. I put the extra leg in there, so it's kind of tough because all my work looks like it should be climbed, and it's playground equipment material. That's what's made out of playboard, and so I have to kind of balance between allowing people to. This is what I got told when I got my first public art. I have to allow people to climb safely, but design it so it discourages climbing. Wow. And so, so you know, the little angle in the middle so that people can't get good footholds and stuff. So those sculptures start to change, and that's kind of where my practice is currently. And so when I applied to come up here, I wanted to see if I could take my work into another material. And so I've just been trying to expand what I can create these components. And so I got this piece over here. And I want to emphasize, like, the individual components are really important to me as well too, as with all of my work. So when I make these pieces, like, I see them individually like this all the time, and that's what's important. And you know, there's just like with the wood ones, like on the top there's an extra hole. Like certain things you can't see in the stone, but I see it. I want to be able to take it apart. Maybe I want to see them individually and kind of appreciate them for what they are. And so that's why I have these photographs here next to that. And then I have another piece out there that I'm working on as well too. And what I found is really interesting with the stone is that it's like way more malleable. And so I'm enjoying that I've done things with my forms that go back to kind of those drawings that I couldn't do with the CNC the way I've been working before. And the stone allowed me to make more organic shapes and allowed me to do more interesting things, and it kind of told me what to do. I think there's this nice conversation between the material and you. It's the same type of conversation I feel like I have with my digital tools, right? Like they do things, they tell me things, I follow along with that. The stone does it the same way as well. So yeah, so that's where I'm at. That's a lot of my stuff. That's what I'm working on now. And if you have any questions, you can ask me.
Was that show? Where was that show during the pandemic?
I was in Pittsburgh as well.
Pittsburgh.
I was in Pittsburgh. Yeah, that was actually in
It was near the furnace. The picture of the furnace that I showed you was in Braddock. So right across the street from unfunctional furniture, which is pretty cool. It was an old gymnasium. That's what that building was.
I came in a little bit, sorry.
You go ahead, Gary.
I came in a little late, so I might have missed this, but looking at those models that you make in the computer themselves and then cut pieces out,
Yeah.
are they planned out when they're in the computer, or do you play with the pieces individually afterwards?
Yeah, so the first two that I ever made, they were completely planned out in the computer, and I think there's something about that I was able to do in these, and I'm still trying to figure out. But everything since then has been found through this process.
Right. That's
So if you look at the one on the top left, there's like that gray weird piece in the front. That's the same as that head part on that one. So yeah, so everything starts within that first process. Because I draw in the computer with them, and then it comes out of it.
That's kind of what I like about scrap metal too, is you can position things and play with it however you want it to be. And if you don't like it, you take it off and you put it somewhere else.
Exactly, and what's kind of funny too is I don't have the sketches because I don't have my sketchbook. When I talked about like the things I had done in the past, I actually, when I was living in New York too, when I was drawing, when I had the kind of like crazy picture, I was drawing weird analog components and naming them in a sketchbook, and drawing them as I was drafting. So I would draw a side view, a top view, bottom view, and then I would draw, because in high school I learned how to draft, because I was originally going to go to school to be an architect. So I had done like hand drafting. So I was like, well, maybe I can design these weird parts, and I started naming them weird things, and I actually found out that I made one of them unknowingly 3 or 4 years later. I used some of the same names. I didn't name it the same thing, but I had like a sketchbook of these just weird, like a nut or a bolt and these things. So
It's full circle.
yeah, so it's real weird. It was real weird when I found that. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Did you learn to do that drafting on a computer?
No.
You did it by hand? Okay.
Did it by hand, yeah.
I was just wondering, because I was thinking about the string piece of the metal that was all being kind of held together. And
Yeah.
it just felt so different from all of your other work, and I was kind of wondering how to you it feels like it connects, or maybe if it feels like it doesn't.
So so I put that piece in here because this piece was kind of like, these two pieces kind of, I look at them as a division point. Both in like kind of coloration, but they're very angular, right? So this piece starts to shift into my work that I work in now. There's this idea of like segments, each different face, surface, right, components. This piece was really connected to these performative works. There was something about the physical labor of building that and sewing each, like it falling on me, getting cut, getting scratched, like existing in it and working around, because I built it around myself. Like I would sit in the middle of it and I would just build and do it. And like these worked with fibers and waxes, and I was like, this was, all these feathers had mesh in them. And so there were certain materials that were similar. And so it felt like this. And so those two pieces kind of were this division point of like the old work and the new work. And like I said, I was originally supposed to put a car seat in it and drive it around like a flying cloud. So it was really attached to this work. Like it was really attached to this. But it has to do with this interest in labor and work in my process. Both kind of conceptually in some of the new pieces, and then the physical process I was really enjoyed. Like I loved carrying a sculpture. I carried the brain up a couple miles. I have my friend documented me carrying it like across campus out into the middle of this field in an arboretum, and I was exhausted, but there was something really fulfilling about this exhaustion. And it was the same with the cloud of just going through this repetitive act.
Kind of going off of that, do you see maybe as like a next step to the series, the season of work that you're in right now, that you might bring back some more of that performativity from the early work, because I mean, they're so playful and colorful, and I really feel like the next step for you could be performative if you wanted to take it that way.
I thought about it and thought about like how that would look,
Mhm.
and I haven't figured that out yet. And so there's something interesting to me, at least, between these two halves of work, right? Because the performative work, it was always documented really well. Like, no one ever saw the sculptures. They would toss, like I tossed the airplane off the parking deck and destroyed it. It had flames on the back too, by the way. Like, I just didn't like them, didn't make it in, like these big flames on it. So they were documented really well. They were presented as documentation. With these works, people have asked me to play with them or engage with them, but I like this kind of sense of wonder. When I talked about this idea of like thinking about how they work, the minute you see me hit so far, I can't push it anymore, I can't pull it anymore, I can't turn it anymore, this sense of wonder starts to deteriorate. And so it's like, because the original, the first two I made, moved. Gosh, where are they? These moved. Like, that's why the design for the arm was, the first one was so interesting, like it moved back and forth. You could take the top off the bottom because it pegged into the slots. This one also had pegs in it, and that wheel could turn, and the top where the red dot is, there's actually a hole in it, and it goes through it, and that could swivel as well too. And so they could have moved, and there was this intention of it, but then I started doing it, and myself lost interest. There's only so much you can do, and so there was this like sense of like I don't want the piece to be figured out, and so I struggle with that in these particular ones because I thought about that and tried to figure it out, but I don't know if there's a way I can create that experience again, or with these ones. But it's in there.
Do you think, Jeff, though, that the connection between these ones, well, your performative work, these ones and the latest work that you've shown us, and even this one, because the objects ignite me as your viewer, that I understand they're performative. So for me, they're performative objects, so I understand how they could interlock and swivel, etc., without doing it, which I like to get engaged in.
And I think about that a lot. Like I want to leave people kind of pondering with it. And I think like the small ones allow people to take it with them and knowing that there's a version of it that exists. So I want to play with more of that. I thought about keeping some existing as parts while they're together, exploring that, kind of making my own boxing for them like toys, and exploring like the viewer having some aspect of the performative element. I like the idea that, like I said, that piece is dispersed, that if the people who bought them got together, they could start to put it together. So there's certain elements there that I think are related to the past work.
And even the performative, the first piece that you showed us with just the model, with all the snapped out parts.
Yeah.
So as a viewer, I understand I can snap these out, do this, do that, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and like in understanding what materials I can do helps too. Like I think it'd be really cool. Like the stone is interesting because it's so heavy, and so there's this interesting act of installing it, when you're lifting it and moving it, and the components of that. Like I had someone lift my work with a boom truck the other day for the first time. I was like, that's crazy. And they just popped it in place, and I just throw it in the back of trucks. So there's certain times where it's performative. I think for me it's quantity, and I'm just trying to make quantity right now and produce amounts of the work. And I think the paintings are really interesting to me because in the program I have no gravity, right? I'm lucky that a lot of my works haven't tipped over, right? Like there's nothing telling me if this work's stable or not outside of my mind, right? So there's times where a piece like I was really worried that one was going to tip over. Like there's nothing under the left side and the weight of it. So in the digital space, I can turn them upside down. They're weightless, and the paintings capture them in these weird moments. And to me, they're weightless in the paintings. And so I think the more ways I can find to export the work out into the world, the more it'll get people thinking about how they could do something with it, or how it could change, or how it could be something different, or connect together.
I had a question, and it was part of the way you introduced the presentation, like about your connection to the city of Pittsburgh, but it was around like not just the colors, but like the material choice going forward, because the way you construct these, like the colors and the shapes are almost outside of decay, because they're designed like digitally, and you view them in a sense where they're perfect and they sort of remain perfect. And you talked about how your connection to Pittsburgh was like seeing a city of industry, but only in its state of decay. So like each of these objects almost live without decay.
Yeah.
And like, because you talked about like going towards stone and a material that sits in space. Like if there was any thoughts you had about maybe like a newer relationship with what decay feels like, because this existed sort of outside of it for people.
Yeah, I thought about playing with ways of decay in my own work. I thought about, like with the plastic work, about providing not stainless steel hardware, but hardware that would rust. And the plastic work would decay, and it would be this weird connection between material that's meant to last and material that is decaying. Stone's really interesting because, like, moving to that, yeah, it's very permanent, but it also decays and breaks down, and if it's outdoors, right, rain and weather will change it. So I thought about it, and I'm not really sure what the relationship there is, or where I want to go with it. It's hard for me to move away from the color aspect, which even plastic, I'm limited in my color, and I'm only kind of working with proportions in a few different colors. I think the playboard comes in like 10 different colors, and there's marine board and sort of things like that, but you can't paint it either. It's meant to be paint resistant, right? Scratch resistant. So, you know, I could find more plastics, but I'm also unsure if I want to keep using plastic. But I like making the pellet work and making the stone work just makes me want to go back to the color even more, because I'm really interested in the interactions of color as well. It's just the same as like I see the physical interactions, right? And I see color interactions the same way. Like I'm really interested in those. The way certain people respond to color palettes. I think, what was it, this one? I went right by it. Yeah, that one. It used to be, like it had a blue in it, like this, almost this baby. It wasn't really a baby blue, but it was this very specific blue, and it happened to be the same blue. Instead, it was instead of the, I think it was instead of the orange, maybe. It was the same blue though that Lego uses in their girl collection, whatever that means. And it was the blue, pink, and purple. And so when I talked to people, there was this very direct, like everyone can go into the specific space. And oh, I know it was this blue, because I was all the pieces share certain colors, right? Like the red in there, the orange from the other one. So they all have colors from one to the other one to kind of unite them. But I was like, that's cool. I don't really know if I want to go that direct. So I'm really interested in the power that color has with that, and I can't do that with limited materials. So it's a long-winded answer to the question.
I'm thinking about the capability for what you're doing to be automated, to be moving, because you're thinking about it's hinging and
Yeah.
moving and shifting and changing shape and stuff like that. And I can't help but think of the frenetic career of Jonathan Borofsky.
Yeah.
Right? And how that idea of working, and the counting, you know, he did the counting until he got an idea, and then he document the idea or create the idea, and the idea of the hammering man, you know, the working in the components, and there's a certain freneticness to his work that I'm feeling from what it is you're getting at. And, I think it's very interesting. It's reflective or of thoughtful about modern, in a way, in a modern life or
Yeah.
modern existence.
What's interesting too, because like I kind of was thinking with stone, I'm like moving through ages of time, right? Like
Yeah.
moving into stone.
Right.
Like I had done
There's an
plastics
anachronism
before.
there about quality, yeah.
And again, it's really, I have a hard time, like, there's this desire to see them to move, but I like not fulfilling that. I really enjoy that the audience keep wanting it, and I'll never fulfill it. Like, that is like a true thing, because when you fulfill it, there's a certain sense of knowledge becoming a handicap. The more you know, the less you try. If you think you know what this does, you're not gonna keep wondering what it does. But if I can make them more ambiguous and give them more potentially moving parts, interlocking components, then you keep wondering about it. I'm also really interested, for me right now, what I'm more interested in is these small ones look very static, like some of the bigger ones. But when I put them together, they start to look really organic. And that's something I'm really interested in, this idea of like these individual components feeling really industrial, and then all of a sudden when you start attaching them, and they're designed to interlock with each other, so there's certain gaps I leave and specific things I cut into them, like some of those holes are the same width as other pieces, some of the gaps left on them, so that I can't easily interlock them. So I'm interested in almost them becoming more organic, and like moving away, but then somehow, but they started as mechanisms. But yeah, I just want people to keep wanting to touch them and not get a chance to, and then want them to move and not get to move, and be stuck with this lack of satisfaction.
You're the wanting more.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like this is like, it's like in my mind, it's like an alternate timeline. It never happened. You don't know. You're never gonna know. You're never gonna get the satisfaction of knowing what would happen if we went towards this weird analog future that we thought was gonna happen. These neon lights, these weird Blade Runner movies that had, you know, umbrellas with, like, you know, just like weird stuff that we thought would happen, but then something jumped and industry changed and the path we were going down completely veered off. You know? I'm interested in like 70s sci-fi, 80s sci-fi. That definitely carries into this.
This is not a big question, but it's the craziest thing. If you didn't tell me these are physically there, every one of these looks so insanely like a render that I can't question that.
Some of them look really weirdly rendered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Colors, backgrounds, things like that. I'm interested in that too. I talk something. I sometimes photographing the works really hard to get the colors I want. But again, I like this idea of weird spaces and like phasing in and out of these spaces. And kind of questioning if they're digital. And I've never shown them in a digital, like my digital models are fully colored, but I've never shown the digital models. I kind of keep them, to me, in these weird graveyards of old components. Like there's old designs of each one of these. There was a proposal for one of the public art pieces that got rejected, but I still have that. I actually turned it into some paintings. I just have like files and files and files of just random things. It's a mess, but I can go back in and be like, oh, let me just take this out. It's just kind of fun. Sometimes I don't know what's real and what's not. I honestly feel like I'm so ingrained in the process that like I don't even know where I start. Like sometimes I just don't, like I used to start one way, now I just go in and I find something and I start in a different point. It's become like I just start in random points now.
Certainly.
Yeah, I pick up a piece and I'm like, you know, I thought this was cool. Like the public pieces, I picked up one, I'm like, this looks cool, maybe I'll make it big. I made it big. There's just, someone used the term like self-pollinating. There's no start anymore. It just exists out of the process. And I look at these as individual artifacts. And until they're bought or gone, they are not safe to be, like, from being altered. cut, refigured, whatever, like there's no, they're not safe.